I'm Wendy Conquest, and I want to welcome you to Conversations on Sex, Addiction, and Relationships. I'm here with Dan Drake and Tim Stein, and today we're talking about masturbation. So this is a topic that comes up a lot with sex addiction and betrayal trauma, because when people are in recovery, they need to decide whether this is a healthy activity and behavior for themselves or not. And sometimes partners or spouses are have an opinion about it or feel strongly about whether this is acceptable or not. And so we wanted to have a conversation about this. So where do we start? I guess
can I just own, can we just own from the very beginning, this is an awkward conversation? Or could be an awkward conversation?
Oh, absolutely. We have been, to the audience out there, the pre-show conversation has been lots of laughing and giggling and embarrassed shudders. So even us sex addiction therapists that talk about all kinds of sexual behaviors routinely, it's still an awkward conversation.
So can we start with defining what masturbation is?
Oh my gosh,
because
we're starting there.
Well, because a lot of people
I think it's fantastic.
Hey,
we should start there.
A lot of people, men will say, hey, I touched myself, but I didn't orgasm, so I didn't masturbate, so I'm still sober.
Oh, how many have you guys had the clients, and I know these clients so well, that have the conversations, well, for male masturbation, so I only stroked myself 4 or 5 times. So, if it's not 6 or more, it's not merely masturbation or not. Or I didn't actually have an orgasm, therefore it isn't masturbation, so it's okay. Or my personal favorite, I didn't use my hands in all the different ways that they find to do it without using their hands. Therefore, it's not masturbation. And I don't know about you two, but the definition I tend to use is just like if you're sexually stimulating yourself, it's whether you get to orgasm or not, whether you use your hands or not, it's masturbation.
I think that's
I have a.
You disagree?
No, I have a polygrapher. I think the correct term is polygrapher, but I like to say polygrapher, even if I'm mispronouncing it. Here locally, and so her definition is extremely strict. So her definition is if you are touching your genitals other than cleaning yourself or brief rearrangement, then that's masturbation.
Okay. That would make sense too.
Because, so to get your point, Tim, so, so someone's in the shower and they're cleaning, but then it goes on a little too long. They're not meaning to intentionally sexually stimulate themselves, but then it turns into that.
And then this is probably getting ahead of ourselves, but is there a middle circle line here versus inner circle, or is it just a hard and fast if you're not cleaning or if you're not rearranging?
That's a good question, which is why do we even worry about boundaries when it comes to masturbation and sex addiction in the first place? Which, and I have my thought, but let me toss that out as a question to you two first. Why do we even care?
Why do we even care? I think the biggest piece, the first piece is it secret or not? Yeah. So I think a lot of the problems happen when there's secret sexual activity, whether it's with another person or by yourself. And so what I hear a lot from my clients is, well, this is something that I do privately. I've done this all my life. And so why would I share that with my wife or my girlfriend that I'm doing this? Why would I do that? And the answer is because she doesn't know it's happening. And does it then lead to less sexual intimacy with a partner if there is, I don't know, guys, does it have to be chronic masturbation? Can it be any kind of masturbation that then interferes with sexual intimacy with a partner?
That's another big question. I think it would depend.
Yeah.
What's the level of, is there a sexual desire difference in the relationship, or what's going on with the masturbation? Is there chronic use of pornography? How long is this going on? I mean, there's a bunch of other questions I would ask.
Yeah, and I will say that I think it varies. It varies, but I want to get back to the other question. Then we're going to go off on this tangent.
Yep.
Dan, why do you care? I mean, with the addict clients that you're working with, why do you care if they're masturbating or not?
For a few reasons. First, my clients tend to, I mean, we're dealing with sexual compulsivity, so problematic sexual behavior of some kind. In most cases, masturbation was a part of someone's sexual history. And again, I think we should name also, we're not trying to say in any of this that masturbation is wrong or bad, or we're not trying to moralize it or come up. We're just going to have a conversation on this. So I understand this can bring up a lot of feelings, different cultures and religious beliefs. So it can stir up a lot. So I think we're not trying to pathologize it, or we're just trying to have a conversation about it. But typically with our clients, it's led to problems for them of some kind. In the 12-step phrase, it's led to some kind of pitiful, incomprehensible demoralization for them, or consequences in their relationship, like you said, Wendy. So it could be sexual, or, I don't like the term, but sexual performance issues, that there may be some kind of, maybe led to ED or lowered, their sexual responses affected.
For me, when I'm thinking about my clients in masturbation, and I look at this primarily at early in their recovery. My default is, let's pull masturbation off the table. And I do that because when I'm thinking about, well, twofold. One, it's been my experience that clients that continue to masturbate where pornography or affairs or acting out sexually was a part of their addiction, that when masturbation stays in the mix, they have a harder time staying sober. And the reason that happens is because when we're doing work around sobriety from sex addiction, what we're actually trying to do is neurologically reprogramming their brain so that those addictive neural pathways aren't the prominent ones, and they're developing healthy neural pathways. And when somebody who's got an addictive neural pathway going on in their brain is masturbating, and especially masturbating and going into fantasy, which I'll circle back to that later when we talk about what healthy self-pleasuring or masturbation looks like. But when they're masturbating and going into fantasy, they're stimulating those addiction neural pathways, which is getting in the way of and hampering the neurological healing of their brain, which is reinforcing the addictive patterns, which is getting in the way of the sobriety and the recovery, which is the reason that they're coming to see me in the first place. That was a mouthful, but that's why I care. But I will also say I've had some clients where masturbation was never an issue for them. It wasn't really a part of their addiction. I remember one guy in particular who had affairs, and he was like, I masturbate 3 times a week, and I'm like, and my red flags go up immediately. And then as we explored it, it's like, well, because his doctor tells him that he has to for
right, which is another whole conversation. We should log that. Can we have a talk on that in a second?
And I had to look into, is this actually real or not? But ultimately for him, it was like, it's not like I'm craving it. I don't look forward to it. I don't love it. I'm doing it because my doctor tells me to, and it didn't have a lot of energy to him. So, okay, not inner circle for you, but that's unusual.
So just for our listeners, and this is new for me too. So doctor telling him to masturbate 3 times a week for, I missed that.
Oh, prostate health. Oh yeah, you haven't gotten this one yet?
No.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. No, it's a pretty common. So urologists, especially as men get older, they'll recommend sexual release, every 72 hours or so, every couple of days. So that's pretty common. And the thinking is, and we can't speak as MDs, so we're putting that out there. We're not MDs, so definitely consult your doctor, but that's pretty common. And sometimes men will use that. Well, I have to, because that's what my urologist is suggesting for my prostate health. So
there's another thing that I want to put out there, and I think it's important to acknowledge this, that, we're all sex addiction therapists, certified sex addiction therapists. There are also sex addiction therapists that fall on the other side of this coin, which there are some sex addiction therapists that will say, masturbation is a healthy form of sexuality. Masturbation is, if somebody's going into sobriety, it's not really fair for us to shut their sexuality down completely indefinitely. And so allowing a client to masturbate is a part of allowing their sexuality to continue.
And
I don't agree with them for a variety of reasons, but that I have heard that from other very respected sex addiction therapists out there that I know and that I work with.
yeah, sometimes I'll say I frame it this way, and it's not perfect, but it's one way to kind of look at it. If let's say I have problems with food, with eating, it's maybe, and I want to change my relationship with food, or I kind of want to like cleanse my system. I think when I'm taking a celibacy period or an abstinence period, or I'm cutting out masturbation from my sexuality, my healthy sexuality. It's kind of like a detox or a cleanse. So I'm going to be what are the cleanses these days? The lemon, cayenne. I don't know. What are the common cleanses? Whatever, it doesn't matter. So, but it's kind of like a cleanse, not to say that's bad or I'm cutting out food, that food's bad. That's not the point. It's to cleanse my system so that I can, reintegrate food in a healthy way. And I think that's the idea. If my brain never stopped engaging, like you said, those neural pathways, and my brain is still going in the same direction, then I'm not really giving myself a chance to develop a new, healthier sexuality. Because the problem with sex addiction is that the sexual behaviors became a maladaptive coping. It became problematic. So if I'm not giving myself a chance to develop new ways of coping, then I don't know. I see my clients struggling.
And I think one of the important things, what you're talking about, and sorry, I'm talking over you, Wendy. I'm going to make this point.
That's okay.
Is that by doing that, masturbation, by the way, I hate that word. I'll talk about that in a second. Masturbation got separated from their own sexuality, because now they're using it not because they're feeling sexual desire or sexual arousal and that sexual energy is coming up for them. They're using it because they're scared, they're angry, they're bored, they're uncomfortable. And rather than being present with the sexual experience of their body, they're escaping into fantasy and jumping off into some netherworld of addictive images. And so while it's a sexual behavior, it's a sexual behavior that's become divorced from their actual sexuality and their experience of sexuality.
I'm gonna put this question in now, just because I don't want to run out of time. So a huge question that I have, especially from people actually in other countries, so Africa, Asia, the Middle East, is how do I stop? So I'm masturbating when I don't want to be masturbating. How do I stop?
Oh man.
Well, I mean, if they're an addict, which I'm assuming that
whoa. So these are people who haven't self-identified as an addict yet. And the term, it's interesting because as the term sex addict goes worldwide, they ask, am I an addict or not? So, I have 18-year-old boys basically asking that, when I wake up and I'm aroused, I want to masturbate and I want to stop because this is, this is against my religion. Like this is not okay. This is against my morals. And so they want to know, right? So they haven't yet. We don't know if they're an addict or not. So do we have to make that distinction? That's a great question, right? Do we make that distinction?
Well, I mean, if the question is, how do I stop? Then I think it absolutely is relevant. If someone's an addict, then the stopping is going to look maybe different than someone who's not, because a non-addict can stop a behavior, just say, I don't want to do that anymore, and they stop.
Or they can easily substitute a healthy behavior for it.
Right.
And it'll be different. And if there's more of a compulsive nature to it, then what do we have to do? We have to, because the analogy that we use of the boulder at the top of the hill, and then it's rolling down the hill, and then it's in the water. And if you try to stop it towards the bottom of that hill, you're going to have a heck of a time stopping the boulder, but it's a lot easier to stop it at the top. So, it's a lot of that taking a step back and not just saying, okay, you feel like masturbating and you're like really struggling with that urge, and now you just need to say stop it, because you're not going to have a lot of success there. But if you back up, okay, so what are the situations where you're likely to struggle with that behavior that you're trying to contain? What are the red flags that kind of earworm towards masturbation is going on for you? And when you first start to notice those, let's come up with some plans on what do you do differently? How do you, do you talk to somebody? Is there a technique, a tool, a calming mechanism, a self-care, something that helps you to calm down and move in a different direction? Do you write yourself a letter that reminds yourself of why you don't want to do this? I also think, and when we're talking about this, I think that there's always a question of why do you want to stop?
That's what I was going to bring up. I think it's worth, because I think we have to back up even. Okay, so it's against whatever, against my morals, against my religion, against whatever. I think it's worth exploring, where did those stories come from? Is it directly written somewhere? You don't do X, Y, or Z, you don't masturbate? Is it, that's just what we've come to believe? Is it because it was shamed early on? Is this family? Is it societal? I mean,
is there a stigma? Like the word masturbation, I was going to say, I hate that word, because the word masturbation, if you look at its origins, comes from the Latin word for self-mutilate. And so the word masturbation for self-pleasuring behavior was introduced by the Catholic Church, who had a lot of problems with people's own personal sexuality if it wasn't for procreation. And so the word masturbation is actually a translation of self-mutilation as opposed to self-pleasuring. And so there's a lot of stigma that can get associated with masturbation. While masturbation can be problematic for people in recovery, it can be, in my opinion, a very healthy sexual expression. And so for me, the question is, well, is somebody uncomfortable with their sexuality? Is there a cultural piece going on? Is there a religious piece going on? Where is their desire to stop masturbating coming from? Because those are going to be very different conversations than the conversation I'm having with an addict about, hey, this is actually undermining your recovery and your sobriety, which you're trying to create.
Agreed. And I just have to say this. So if you guys, I am a Christian, and I grew up with sex is, it wasn't really said as overtly. It was sex is saved for marriage, but it's kind of bad until then. Like that was the sort of message, including, with yourself or with another. And yet when you really look, I'm all for whatever someone's going to come to believe about this. But if you look at the Bible, I'm not sure about other texts, but there is zero mention of masturbation. There's a ton on lust, but not much on masturbation, if anything. There's one passage that sometimes people use, but it's not. Anyway, there's nothing there. So it makes me wonder, so where are these messages coming from? You talk about the Catholic Church. Clearly there's, I don't know. I mean, there's a whole history of this that I think is at least worth exploring. I'm not going to necessarily try and change someone's beliefs, but it's worth looking at, what do I believe? Why do I believe it? Where did this come from? Is there shame involved in it? If I want to stop, that's fine. I'm not going to try and say you should or you shouldn't do something, but I think it's worth looking, where's the shame coming from? What's that about? And I think really trying to heal from that, because I haven't found shame help anybody.
Oh, no. No.
So we're talking religious, but we also might be talking cultural.
Of course.
And we do have, we're going to be interviewing, what's her name, Dan? Artie, what's Artie's last name? Do you know?
Chabam Dharam.
Okay.
Sorry,
and no, that's okay. She specializes in cultural differences. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's another part.
And that's the other thing. I think we have to be really sensitive of that. We may have a certain belief, and that may very well not be something that another culture is going to believe about masturbation. I think we really need to respect that.
Yeah. And there is a big piece about respecting what people want to do with masturbation, whether they think it works, whether it's cultural, whether it's religious, and do they choose to embrace that religious belief and teaching, or the title of this episode, unless we've decided to call it something different, is something along the lines of Fap or No Fap. And that's a whole movement that came out of, what college age young people on the internet and Reddit, where Fap is the noise that you hear when a male masturbates. And so they had all these No Fap groups that came about because a lot of these college students that were masturbating and looking at porn found that they were having problems with sexual functioning, and it was creating a lot of problems for them. So there was like an organic development of this No Fap group. And, you know, if that's working for them and that's giving them what they need in their life, Wendy keeps disappearing.
Yeah, this is the first time this has ever happened. It's really
But
bizarre.
but if that's giving them what they need in their life, I'm certainly not going to judge it. I just think that that's what they need. And at the same time, let's have a conversation about where did that come from? Why does that have that weight for you? And if they're one of our addiction clients, how does that fit into their recovery?
Right. Yeah. And can I, on that note,
Yeah,
we talk about culture and there may be reasons to masturbate, not masturbate. So a lot of our clients, and I'm sure this is a question, especially from any partner of an addict that would be listening. So this is a huge topic that comes up in recovery. So we've talked about the person's own sexuality. So we're talking about, let's say, an addict. Now, what do you do if I'm partnered? I'm in a relationship. What do we do with healthy sexuality, masturbation, if I'm in a relationship with a partner? Maybe I've determined it's safe or healthy for me and I have these parameters around it or whatever, but then my partner feels really unsafe and threatened by masturbation.
Before we even get into that conversation, let's have the in-between conversation, which for me is, well, for somebody in recovery, when might self-pleasuring be healthy and appropriate? Now I've got my answer, but I really want to hear yours first.
I feel like you got like this is the right answer, and I hope you come up with my answer.
Yeah, and I've got the right answer, but I'd like to hear what you have to say first.
Well, let me just say, no, I wrote up. I don't know that there is one right answer. I wrote up some questions. So if someone's considering healthy masturbation, I wrote up questions to consider for healthy masturbation. I put up a bunch of questions for someone if they're really thinking, okay, this is something I think I'm ready for. So if anyone wants that, I'm happy to send that out. I have a PDF of it. I'm happy to send that out. And it's really a way to think through, why am I doing this? Why now? What am I using masturbation for? Where am I in my recovery journey? Is it time yet? What would determine what's my primary function for trying to reintegrate masturbation? Do I have boundaries around it? Can it be a healthy, connected spiritual experience, even possibly? You know, because for our clients, typically sexuality or masturbation, like you said earlier, is a disconnecting kind of, I'm trying to avoid my feelings. I'm trying to avoid myself. Can I actually connect with my body? You know, that sounds obvious, but for most addicts, they're not masturbating to connect with themselves. They're masturbating to discect. So
oftentimes
learning. So I just want to say that when I've worked with, it's mainly with younger men clients that I've had. And so it's this piece of, can you feel your whole body? If you're going to engage in masturbation, can you really be totally connected?
Yeah.
And I've had clients say, you know, Wendy, you're crazy. Like I tried it and I'm breathing and it was such a weird experience. I just stopped. Or they really pursue that and try to have a full body experience. I've been certified integrative body psychotherapist in addition to being a CSAT. So this is a big piece of work that I've studied and practiced. The second thing is, okay, if you're going to fantasize at all, can you integrate your wife? Can it be only solely about your wife? And what I find is that I have to ask the wife's permission, or they have to ask the wife's permission, because a lot of wives are like, I don't want you doing that thinking of me. I
actually don't even encourage fantasy at all, even with the wife, because I don't want them to unintentionally objectify their wife and turn her into an addictive object. And so I encourage them to stay out of fantasy and you're staying present. And I love what you're saying, which is like, this is a whole body experience. It's not genital focused. It's a body sensual experience. And I will sometimes talk about, you know, you're following the ebbs and the flows of your sexuality, and it will typically end in orgasm, but it may not. And, you know, there's that whole piece about healthy self-pleasuring that is very different than addictive masturbation. And my rule of thumb is I want people to be sober minimum of a year, preferably 18 months before we even enter into that conversation. And I love, Dan, that you've got a list of, hey, here are things that might indicate that you're ready for that. I had a client who came in, he had been sober for 18 months, 2 years, something like that, wanted to open up the idea of healthy self-pleasuring. And we had a lot of conversations, and it seemed appropriate. He felt like he could do that. He talked with his sponsor. He talked with some other guys in program. He talked with his wife, got everybody's blessing, got everybody on board, and opened up with appropriate parameters what healthy self-pleasuring for him would look like. And I will say that I've had some clients that have opened up that door and have felt like this is too close to masturbation, and I feel my addiction sort of creeping in here, so I'm not going to go here. And so they'll open up the door, explore it a little bit, and then close the door and say, this isn't for me. This particular gentleman was opening up that door and continuing, and his wife came to him one day, and I loved this conversation. So she came to him and she said, I know that you've been self-pleasuring, and I can tell because I just know. And when you do that, what I feel is it feels to me like you've been sexual with someone else other than me, which you have. You've been sexual with yourself. And when that happens, what I reflexively do is I pull away from you. And so, and I love the way that she said this, I'm not going to tell you whether you should do that or not. I just need to let you know that this is what happens for me when you're doing that. And it opened up a beautiful conversation for them. And he came in and shared that with me. And I asked him, what are you going to do? He's like, well, I'm not going to self-pleasure anymore, because being sexual with her and my relationship with her is so much more important to me than self-pleasuring. But I thought she opened that up in such a beautiful way. And he was able to respond to that conversation. And not everybody does, but he was able to. And for them, that worked out really well, which brings me back to what you were talking about, Dan, which was how do addicts and their partners manage or deal with their feelings around self-pleasuring, even if the addict and the therapist and the community feels like it's healthy, it still may not be comfortable for the partner.
Right.
Mhm.
Which I'm sure we could probably have a whole separate conversation on this, because I'd actually love to hear Jeannie's thoughts on this. I know she's not with us today. And I can also empathize for any partners that are listening. This is can be really scary. So the idea, it's almost like, and you think in AA terms, if I'm an alcoholic, let's say I was a Scotch man or a whiskey person or whatever. That was my drink of choice. It sometimes for partners like, well, so now you're drinking beer, you're having wine, that's still alcohol. It still is really like, is that okay? So, and I can appreciate that for alcoholics, it's complete abstinence. We're never drinking again. That's the goal. Or that's kind of one day at a time, all that. For sexuality, it's just different, right? Because the goal is not just stopping our sexuality. The goal is changing our relationship with our sexuality. So that's a healthier thing. But I can also appreciate how scary that can be for the partner, because, it feels like you're opening a massive door open, and that feels really threatening, really, really scary, really unsafe. So I also understand there might be very differences of opinions with this based on the different professionals. So I'm acknowledging that, but I just want to put that out there. But how do you guys approach this when it comes to your couples that you work with?
Well, for our listeners, I just want you to know that you're listening to conversations on sex, addiction, and relationships. And we're here with Tim Stein and Dan Drake, and we're talking about masturbation.
So with the couples that I work with, I really approach this as open the conversation. I'm not going to tell you what you have to do and what the right thing is, because I don't think there's a right thing. But I want them to have a conversation. What does self-pleasuring mean to him? Why does he want to, or her? Why do they want to open up that door? What does it mean for the partner? And are they okay with that? Are they comfortable with that? Do they have fear around that? Is that fear related to the addiction and the trauma they've experienced? Is that concern related to their own personal beliefs or cultural beliefs or religious beliefs? And let's start having a conversation. I will tell addicts that it's not appropriate for their partner to determine what their program is going to be, but it's also not appropriate for them not to take their partner's experience and feelings into consideration when they're figuring out their program. And so,
and their program has a direct impact on their partner.
It does. And so I want them to have a conversation. I don't have, any magic answer to any of this stuff, but I find that most couples are able to navigate through that if they're willing to have the conversation. And there's, I think one of the caveats we need to put in here is, and if there's solid sobriety in place first of all, and if the addict is, actively, maybe not perfectly, but actively moving into recovery. So they're finding moderation, balance, and they're not doing the stupid, lying, cheating, telling, going into denial kind of stuff.
Okay.
And the partner has actively worked on whatever trauma that they've got and is able to tolerate the addict's imperfection that's going to be present in their recovery simply because they're human.
Right.
If those four things are in place, I think that the conversations are very doable.
Okay, so here's a scenario. There's a couple. Yeah, there's a couple, and so he's been sober for 3 years, and not that long. Let's not go that long. He's been sober for a year, and she's been doing her betrayal trauma work. And so he starts saying, hey, we're not sexual. We haven't gotten to the point of being physically intimate. And so I'm a sexual being, so I should be able to masturbate. Or we really need to start working on being more sexual, or not even being more sexual, but at least, being more physically intimate, like hugging and cuddling and kissing and hugging. And so if that's not going to happen, well, then, I have to, I'm going to need to. What do you guys say?
Okay. So a few things.
Uh-huh.
A few things. First, unless you all tell me otherwise, nobody has died from not masturbating or having sex.
Oh,
do you know of any story that's
is that not true? I add on to that I have searched the medical database and no one's testicles have exploded.
They haven't. Okay. I just want to put that out there. To my knowledge, nobody has died by not having sex or by not masturbating. Okay. I think we just need to say that. It might sound obvious, but that's important because that's a starting place. So healthy sexuality, sure, is that our goal? But when you're now, what I'm hearing in your question, Wendy, or this situation, it's an ultimatum.
Yeah.
It feels like if you don't do this, I'm going to do this. And there may be multiple other choices. But first of all, the approach is not, the approach sounds kind of coming from a victim stance and aggressive and entitled, as opposed to what I would say, even before the conversation you're talking about, Tim, I would encourage this person to talk with their team. So their therapist or coach, their sponsor, their recovery team. And then first float this with them first. This is what I'm thinking. What do you all think? What are you seeing? And then coming up with some general parameters first with like, this is what it may look like. That's kind of doing that front work ahead of time, then maybe approaching the partner if the team's like, you know what, you've been doing this, this, and this, and it seems appropriate for you. I feel like the conversation would then coming to the partner wouldn't be this is what's going to happen. It's more of, here's what I'm thinking. It's not like necessarily asking permission, but it's also not dictating the terms.
It's not a conversation that goes, if we're not going to do this, then I need to do this. Right. I should be able to. And if you're not gonna, then I'm gonna.
That's not a conversation. That's
like having a tantrum, whereas if that person is going to, like you said, the sponsor, the therapist, the other people in the community, he can have his tantrum over there and they're going to contain and they're going to push and they're going to nudge. And eventually, if he's ready for this and people feel like he's really appropriate, eventually recovery is going to get folded into that conversation. And then it's probably going to sound more like, hey, we're not at a place where we're being sexual with each other. And I'm realizing that it's important for me to figure out how to connect with my sexuality in a healthy way. And I'm thinking about opening up to healthy self-pleasuring with some boundaries. Here are what they might be. What are your thoughts about that? And that's a whole different conversation. And I think I reacted to the same thing you did, Dan, which is it's less about the timing. It's more about the tone and the energy attached to the conversation that tells me a lot about where this person is in the recovery and how ready they are to open up, that behavior, because that behavior can be a slippery slope if it takes you back into your addiction. And it can also be a springboard into healthy sexuality if you're managing it well with appropriate boundaries and containment.
Right. The entitlement, the attitude tells me, I mean, is that active recovery when I'm dictating the terms of how this is going to go and giving you two choices? That doesn't sit well with me. And I know it's a really delicate thing. We may disagree on this, but if ultimately it's approached in a safe, healthy way, like you just said, Tim, and the partner says, I don't feel safe. I don't feel comfortable with that quite yet. Maybe can we talk about this in 6 months, or maybe there's a time frame. I generally personally defer to the partner's safety if the partner doesn't feel safe, assuming that they're doing their work, they're kind of processing this and we've worked through it, because I don't know. I find that it can erode relational safety or the partner's safety if the addict's moving forward and the partner really doesn't feel safe with it. Now, if this is long-term and they're chronically not going to integrate healthy sexuality back into their relationship, maybe obviously a different story, but that's generally where at least I start.
I don't know where I defer. I think I would open up to, well, there are always consequences to our choices.
That's true.
You can choose to hold this boundary and not open up to self-pleasuring. And the consequence might be that your partner appreciates that and they feel safer, and whatever progress goes that way. But it also might mean that your sexuality and your experience of your sexuality stays on hold. And that might be uncomfortable for you, and it might bring up fear and pain for you. You can choose to move forward, even though they are uncomfortable for this. You can choose to move forward with your own self-pleasuring. And the consequence is that your partner isn't going to feel like you respected their feelings and that you're not taking their experience into consideration, and they might pull away from you. And so I rather than telling them what they should do, it's their consequences. You may not like the consequences, and the consequences might be comfortable or uncomfortable, but there are the consequences. What do you choose? What are you choosing to do? And maybe go have this conversation. And again, like you said, go talk to your sponsor. Go talk to people in program. Talk to some other people, because you're going to get different answers.
Yeah. I have another question for you guys. I don't know how we're doing on time. We have a little bit of time, right? So we've kind of assumed, we've talked about like male sexuality, male masturbation. I'm curious. So how does this, we talked about kind of heterosexual couples. What about same-sex couples? What about if it's a female addict? Does this masturbation topic, does that change at all based on the constellation of the couple? Or if someone's single, by the way, too. That's a whole other question.
So I'll talk about women sex addicts. It's interesting because it's a lot of the same dynamics. So if they're in a couple and they're secretly masturbating, a lot of times we're talking heterosexual, boyfriend, or, well, I'm going to say homosexual as well. That they're not, the partner isn't going to like it if it's secret, and if they're going off and doing that and not knowing about it. So and same thing of okay, so why are you doing this? Is it to relieve anxiety? Is it to escape some way? Feelings that you're having are too big, too much, and so this is a relief. So same questions, right? With men or with women, is why do you feel that you have to do this? So it goes back to that.
And I think it can be the same thing, which whether you're a man or a woman, if you're masturbating, it has the potential to disconnect you from your sexuality. If you're going off into fantasy, if you're using it for all those other reasons, it can still be problematic. And we've all heard stories. Women can get hooked up in compulsive masturbation the same way men can, and it can create problems. The-
So I have
think,
a question. Sorry.
I think one of the differences might be, if the partner is a male, do they have the same concern about the addict masturbating? And I think that some might and some might not.
That's interesting. Could we surmise that it may be more embarrassing or for the male to say, yes, I do have a problem with this. That it just should be okay, or he should be all right with it. But on a core level, it's the same dynamic, right? Wow, you have had sexual impropriety with somebody else, and I was not knowing this and traumatized by it. And now you're going off and being sexual with yourself. But that should be okay, right? That I shouldn't have a problem with that.
Or they might have the same feeling, like there's the term cuckold, which is, I feel like, I've been sexually emasculated because you don't need me
Right.
to be sexual. And so they might have a very strong reaction to masturbation. And again, for me, it brings it back to what we were talking about. How do you respectfully open this up to a couple's conversation so that the addict is exploring what does it mean for them, and why are they opening that up? And can they hear their partner's experience and be open to their partner's perspective, even if it doesn't match what they want to hear?
Does this conversation shift if someone's single versus in a relationship?
I think it does. I think if somebody is single, they're more likely, my experience has been, if somebody is single, they're more likely to bring up the idea of opening up healthy self-pleasuring, because that is would be their primary experience of sexuality. They tend to bring that up more frequently than my clients who are in couples, where the couple is trying to figure out how to become sexual together with each other in a relationship.
What about, I agree with you. I'm just thinking though, I can think of a number of situations where where someone has kind of avoided intimacy, avoided relationships, and they get year after year, they want to be in a relationship. But I think masturbation is a way of kind of, masturbation, pornography. I can get enough, quote unquote, enough of my sexual needs met without really having to take a risk to be in a relationship. And then I ultimately avoid getting into a relationship.
And then we're talking, regardless of it, we're talking about recovery stuff. So, part of recovery for my clients who are single is, okay, it's time for you to go out and date. And it's time for you to figure out what healthy dating looks like.
Right.
And if you're self-pleasuring, is that getting in the way for some reason of your willingness or your interest to go out there and figure out what healthy dating looks like for you? And that's a whole different episode for us to record, what healthy dating and recovery looks like.
Yeah, probably log that.
Well, yeah. And also there's this piece, I think today we're making the distinction between masturbation with pornography. I think mainly we've been talking about masturbation without pornography. And so one of the challenges that I find with a lot of single people right now is that the masturbation with pornography seems to be a deterrent to being in an actual relationship. I always say, hey, porn delivers, right? Like it is created to meet certain needs. And so if those needs are pseudo met that way, then how do people actually be in real relationships?
And it's easy. I don't have to buy it dinner. I don't have to call it up to make sure it's having a good day. I don't have to meet its parents or manage its family. I don't have to worry if porn is going to be jealous because I went off to hang out with some friends and watch a soccer game.
Well, I think even more for my people I've talked to, porn is not going to reject me. I don't have to face the humiliation or the pain of abandonment or rejection or whatever, all that kind of stuff that might happen in initiating connection with someone else.
And that's kind of, for me, when it's where we get back to sex addiction, and we often refer to sex addiction as an intimacy disorder. And, you know, porn allows someone to be sexual without having to be intimate. And what we're really saying is that in a relationship, intimacy isn't always easy. And some people choose to just avoid it altogether because they can go and experience sexuality without having to manage that, which is, you know, there's a point to that, but there's so much that you miss if you're shutting that part of possibility of a relationship off and not allowing yourself to really figure out or explore integrating sexuality into a relationship.
So I want to thank you all for listening, and I want to encourage you, if you enjoy this conversation, to share it on your different social media outlets. And if you liked us, please do so on YouTube, or can you do it on Spotify? I'm so bad at this. Can you give a like on Spotify? Yeah, we'd really appreciate that. And we look forward to seeing and listening and hearing you on the next conversation. Thanks so much.